now I want to introduce our workshop leaders. Our workshop leaders, Patrick, Tijn, Eduardo, and Michal. I don't know how Zoom is working, but I think you can see them at the top, at least on my screen. They combine a collective called Monitor Lizard, which operates out of Bangkok, Thailand. The three of us, Rebecca, John, and I, had the pleasure of working with them as colleagues while we were teaching at INDA, which is an architecture and design school operating in Bangkok. And all four of them are still educators at the school. And we're really excited to kind of work with them on this first workshop. So we thought their interests collectively were quite diverse and eclectic, and also it means that the ways that they choose to work with different media formats in terms of collection and presentation is very, I think, you know, in a way particular to this topic of researching. So I'll stop talking and I'll give the platform over to you guys. So thank you once again for doing this.
Thanks, Danny. We're happy to be here. I'm Patrick. If you are unfamiliar with Zoom, right now I'm not sharing my screen. You can probably click, you have this option of like basically spotlighting one window or using the grid or clicking on individuals. If you click on mine, you should be able to see it larger while I'm talking. If other people start talking, it might be replaced, and I can spotlight other people as well throughout this. I mean, we don't want to make any assumptions. We've been using this platform a lot in our school, mainly because the school purchased accounts for the instructors. And this is kind of streamlined, and this is why we're using it right now, is because we've learned to do certain things with it over the past 3 months since early March, when our university closed face-to-face classes. And we went online. But we want to kind of talk a bit, not just about research, but tools in general today, as a kind of general topic of conversation. Just to kind of maybe introduce myself and then hand it over to the other ones. I'm Patrick. I've been in Bangkok for almost 5 years. As Danny said, we have all been the Space Saloon cohort and the Monitor Lizard cohort have been teaching at an international program for design and architecture in Bangkok all together. We've been here all a varying range of times, and at Monitor Lizard, we're 4 people who really are individuals, not necessarily working together, but since as an office, but working together at school and starting to spend a lot of time together as friends and slowly starting to do things together. So really what you're seeing today is like this kind of like group of friends who share an office space, who are starting to kind of collaborate on certain things, but really just kind of support one another as well. Trying to kind of build, strengthen ourselves together. If the other ones want to say hi too before I get the more formal conversation going, that would be great.
Patrick, can I just jump in real quick?
Yeah, please.
I'm being told that I'm stuck on speaker view. For those who don't know, you can go up to the top right and change your speaker view to gallery view, but also if you want to stay on speaker view, for some reason I'm still stuck on the
okay,
one.
I'll take you off. Make sure. Thanks for letting me know.
Sorry about that.
No problem. So if I talk, maybe I will be seen automatically in speaker view, I hope.
I still seem to have a yellow box around me, which prioritizes my screen.
I only see Danny.
Really? Can you click
yes,
on me?
I'm...
Top left corner, you can click pin video, and then you can choose a video to pin. So no matter who talks, you will be able to see that person.
Did you guys get that?
Like if you go towards the top left of each individual window, one of the options would be in video. I think on my browser is a third one. I don't know.
Is that better, guys?
Yes.
I don't have that option, and maybe for people with the paid account. Ah, now I do.
I think I fixed the spotlight problem.
That's working. That's working.
Awesome. Okay. Great. So, Tijn, Mihail, I don't know if you want to pop in for a second and say hi before I continue to talk.
Hi, my name is Tijn. Well, most of it was already addressed very briefly by Patrick. I've been in Bangkok for the last 6.5 years, and I've been working with these 3 great friends and also colleagues. And I'm really excited and honored to join everyone here.
Yes, hey everyone, I'm Michał, and I'm here like in Bangkok 3 years, but since 1.5 years, like I've been like working also at INDA, yeah, with amazing people, and nice to meet you, and nice to see you all.
And I'm Eduardo, the pin video guy, and yeah, I'm really excited about this workshop. Also because it's very experimental, at least, well, I think for all of us, but we had very interesting discussions that we're excited to share with you guys. So yeah, thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks so much. We're really happy to keep in touch with you guys. I think it's really great to kind of make these connections. So, I mean, in a way, I'll just kind of like talk about what maybe you're seeing on Mihail and I's screen at the moment. We're trying to, this relates to what we're proposing of the workshop, but it also maybe helps you tell a little bit about ourselves. So you're going to see some images of some things we've been involved before. I also have some like multiple cameras set up from old expired devices that I have around home. But basically we found this old soy sauce factory in Bangkok. We've converted that into an office and exhibition space. As I started to talk about before, because our university went online, the 4 of us kind of participated in a multimedia final review. We call it a parade. And this was a kind of effort by the school, because the institution basically handed us Zoom and said that we needed to convert our classes over to this. And in a certain way, we knew that wouldn't be enough. So there was a very kind of there's a lot of proaction about trying to add to this. I think in a lot of ways, we all just we're experiencing right now the kind of terrible aspects of this platform. Like we all arrive in silence and waiting for critical mass to come before we start. There's no way for small groups of us to have conversations that are in somewhat intimate or private. Everything's extremely formalized, and initially you're only allowed to kind of see a viewer's webcam and see their immediate personal environment. And this could even be considered extremely uncomfortable, potential violation, or too much information for some people. So as we started to engage with our students online, all this stuff started to become very clear. And this is why we're trying to, as we begin to talk about research, we're also trying to propose being more proactive about the tools that are handed to us, to try to take them kind of above and beyond and not let them control our visual or communicative language in how we work together. So we're here to talk about research, and we propose this idea of a kind of metaverse research. Be your own server. This is the kind of call to action which we would like to propose relative to this workshop. And we were talking all together, and I have some memory of actually giving a short lecture at the beginning of a year 2 class at our school, where we had to kind of like, in an extremely rudimentary way, introduce the concept of research to a young group of students who we really can't assume maybe know how to do certain things. And I think in one way, this is very foolish. Of course, you know how to do this, but at the same time, maybe we don't take anything for granted. So these are some of the slides where we're actually showing students like how to Google, like in certain ways, like how to search by books, images, or the basic web, how to find more similar content in posts, how to search by image file, and then how to organize an archive folder of research relative to a specific topic. And I think we don't want to have that conversation today, but I think over the next 2 weeks, I think it is, I mean, we teach at a university, it is, we're all adults. It is good to have like kind of a base ground of research practices when it comes to citing, knowing where to go. And that's something that we can kind of more informally talk about. But in a kind of broader way, we really want to call to the front of the conversation, what tools are you using to research and to present that research and to communicate that research and to document that research. As a kind of provocation, the last slide here, El Goog, this is actually a kind of expired website that doesn't work as it used to, but the kind of concept of it was that it flips the Google search algorithm. So it's going to give you your last result first, just to kind of shake you out of some sort of habit of comfort in finding the kind of closest, most accessible information and assuming that is the kind of right and prioritize. So I think kind of conceptually, this is an interesting thing to start with. El Goog, this kind of, even if we use our tools, we try to kind of subvert them in some ways to get kind of different answers than other people, or to kind of, in a very playful way, to experiment with our approach. Also, I think over the next 2 weeks, we would like to try to provide to you some basic resources that we think are interesting, important, relevant, for lack of a better term. And so I think in Discord, if everyone is participating in this would be a great way to provide leads or to talk about certain platforms. But all of these have certain pros and cons of them. There might be a kind of temporary hiatus on the regular terms of JSTOR, but you usually need to be affiliated with the university in order to have JSTOR access. I know there might have been some sort of temporary suspension of that given the online migration in the past few months, and similar platforms relative to online classes have done something similar, or even universities have put their classes on free. So this is just this kind of like scattering of maybe interesting platforms and channels that we would like to kind of push towards you. Of course, you probably know most of them already, and this is a conversation that can be ongoing. But again, rather than talking about like sourcing or archiving or specific channels to research in, we think it's the intent of our workshop is to kind of encourage you to use the momentum of new projects to firstly question the comforts and barriers of online and IRL research, and to test alternative platforms, techniques, and communities. And these alternative techniques and communities, like this is something that we really want to push, and I think it's already starting. And I mean, even up to a certain point, you may be well beyond what we know about these and how to access them. A sort of an anecdote about the exhibition, year-end exhibition review we did is that we proposed to use Discord as part of the platform to communicate with students. And as we were introducing a lot of software to them at the time, we thought we would have to introduce Discord, but the students were like, no, we know how to do this, like much better than you, don't worry about it. And so in this way too, we're kind of curious to see where you guys are at before we like maybe suggest any explicit channels, because you may know much better. But I think the idea of like questioning what browser you're using, questioning what search engine, what channel, what communication app you're using is a really important one. We can look at this kind of like spectrum of how, again, different comforts or barriers that different channels offer or hinder. This is something to kind of, I think, for all of us to uncover and not to just fall into the kind of passive habits of what was preloaded on your computer, of course, or what is the kind of most popular one. Like really, what do they offer? How are you as a user of them really embedded in this kind of network of information, and or what information is available to you? There are there's one maybe very interesting that we might talk about in a few ways. Again, there's good and bad things about it, but Brave browser is one that we've been using, a few of us in the studio lately, and it works with a kind of concept of attention token. It's a cryptocurrency where based on how you watch ads, you can kind of make micro donations back to publishers that you want to support, and they can get a percentage of it back. So you're really kind of selecting about what ads you might want to see, and then have to kind of relocate the attention that you're giving that, which is the basic attention token that cryptocurrency that it uses, in order to then kind of propel micro communities online. So this is one example, but there are other good and bad things. It was created by the former head of Mozilla as a separate project. But this idea of attention and anonymous contribution is quite interesting. But maybe now we can kind of turn our head to Zoom. I mean, I already started to talk about some of its pitfalls and some of the kind of obstacles in terms of using it in the classroom a little bit. But this is a screenshot of us using it for our semester for our fourth year review. There's a few of us inside of that, but we were doing these massive calls of upwards to 100 students at a time, 10 instructors for like review moments, and then everyone was breaking into smaller groups to do tutorials online. But again, as I said, the university provided this to us, and it was kind of assumed that that's how we had to conclude the rest of the semester, using this tool as our primary communication. And basically you can share screen, you can create a virtual background, but maybe that's it. And students had to kind of redirect their project and creative direction according to what it would allow. And ultimately it becomes very flat. And I think there's really important questions to ask about like why Zoom, and like where the hell did it come from? I had never heard of it before. All of a sudden it was like basically supporting like 1/3 of the universities across the world, and without really too many problems. I mean, it ran into these milestones of like security breaches and issues which had to be addressed. And there was articles published about the leaking of user data. But it's very interesting how it was able to support such a rocket projection of users like so quickly, and we had never heard of it before. But I think the reason it was so widely adapted is because it seems approachable, it's lo-fi, it's non-threatening, it's non-invasive. But does that mean it should kind of control your kind of channeling and output of information? This is what we kind of want to test. And I think in this current state, students and teachers are being asked to creatively work around their restrictions and try to embody what happens in the classroom, try to meet student investment as a consumer, meaning like students are paying tuition, what did they get back for it in terms of the kind of comparison of just buying online classes from a kind of scattering of different providers. We're being asked to kind of find solutions in the technology and to define how we work right now. And in terms of the institutions, I think they have a problem of trying to kind of keep up with the chaos of the internet. And in terms of how Zoom hosts that chaos, it's not very good. And I think what we're trying to do today and with the kind of technical workshop is trying to kind of like really make sure that we're trying to push beyond the kind of flattening pressure that Zoom might be putting on us. Because there's a certain like unexcitement when it comes to like coming to one of these meetings, what it has to offer, what will happen there. There's expectations are very low. And it's interesting to think about how we can kind of try to push them back against them a lot more. So in a very kind of like general way, we can talk about like the workshop prompt now, and then we're gonna kind of open up the conversation into other realms after we talk about the parade. But the workshop prompt of Be Your Own Server is to actively pursue documentation, presentation, and collaboration techniques against the omnichannel. Create a workspace which challenges the flatness and formality of off-the-shelf tech to contain, share, and celebrate living research, living projects for you and your affinity group. And this objective of build a live metaverse of resources. And this is what we're trying to kind of like lightly demo today. But as the organizers in Space Saloon know, we wanted to be at the studio to kind of give you this like exposition of place. to show you our workspace and to kind of combine and flatten that. But there is a curfew in Bangkok right now because of COVID. So we're not allowed to be out of our houses past 10 p.m. And in terms of the timing of this event, and corresponding with as many of you, we had to kind of position it here. So right now, all of us are at home separately, but this is very interesting, the way kind of like time zones work and the way we're trying to work together. And we're trying to have these live moments. It's being recorded. There's a lot going on. It's a very complex situation. Lastly, before I hand it over, I'm just going to kind of show this. It's kind of compilation of content that was created relative to a virtual reality exhibition that we had at our school. Again, as I said, we were using Zoom, but we proposed using this online platform of Sansar and live streaming on Twitch to kind of complement Zoom, so that we weren't just in meetings sharing screens, but you can see the students had avatars. Students were installing, they were given kind of template files that they could populate their work in, install it in these groups. There was a large exhibition group, and this is kind of collective space that we were hoping would not only kind of build excitement that the kind of end-year conclusion was more than a Zoom call, but it was also some place where maybe more informal interactions could happen amongst students. We did this in a very short time span from like the first week of March to the first week of May, and it was in many ways very messy. But we had to be very transparent with the students in terms of like how we communicated with them. You can see on my screen, I have some of the guidelines that we provided in terms of, which were just like raw Google documents that walked students through the steps they had to take in order to take the template that we provided and populate their work with it. Basic exercises to kind of texture map and to check the polygon count of their models, so that we were able to manage like these environments or worlds that were able to be visited by as many people as possible. You can also see we had to conduct surveys about the kind of computational capacity of our students in terms of building this network on a bunch of laptops at people's homes. So we had to ask about like their GPU and CPU and what their internet bandwidth was to try to find the feasibility of an event like this. And even in certain cases, you can see here, there were like memes created as a certain type of media to kind of try to communicate with students in a more informal way. We could give them lists of instructions that kind of walk them through the steps they had to make with their models. But then Mihail made this like amazing meme to talk about like the kind of maybe potential of like low poly resolution aesthetics that go into the project, as well as like organizing files. So we kind of experimented in many different ways in terms of trying to think about how to translate a physical event into virtual space, how to go above and beyond the Zoom platform, but also how to kind of keep this live communication with students to see how feasible things would be in a kind of situation that we didn't know how it would work or not. So that is a kind of like brief introduction into the prompt, which we can kind of summarize again, but I think I can hand it off to Eduardo now.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to be sharing my screen where you can actually see the back of house of the software that Patrick was using to create that interface. It's a software called OBS that we will get more into throughout the week. But I think with my very short intervention, what I wanted to throw out were perhaps some questions that I have when it comes to the idea of documenting the now, and like live streaming as a possibility or as a tool that allows us to not only do research retrospectively, but the ability to do research as things are happening, as reality is happening. So, I mean, of course, recently with the SpaceX launch, this was yet another event on like YouTube Live that had this immediate moment of following and like broadcast. And I think this whole concept of or like this notion of watching together but separately is something that, you know, has been very present throughout the modern history of the times. These are some of the episodes that have most watched by people, I guess, through mostly television broadcasts, but I mean, I guess through the internet and the ability of like personalized live stream, a lot of events can be recorded, basically down to, you just need to have the devices that do that. And of course, there are serious implications like the Christchurch murder or like terrorist act, where the shooter was broadcasting it live for 17 minutes on Facebook. And this way we are all kind of becoming spectators of an event. And this idea of this is what's happening now, and this is the interface, is something that we've been thinking and talking a lot about these past few days, particularly preparing for this. But like, but also with our students, right? Like, what is this interaction? How do you document process? How do you share ideas, or how do you talk about things that are on your table? How do you share those moments through the interface of the screen? I think particularly the notion of the webcam is something that has almost been accepted almost universally as a way also to depict the city as it is now. So you would have all these like portals with webcams, but also where are these webcams positioned, like the angle and the webcams that also make it to these public websites are not necessarily the CCTV cameras that populate the city, but rather those of landmarks, and what are they trying to depict. In the screen here you can see that's Plaza de la Dignidad in Santiago de Chile, which not anymore due to the curfew, but until recently was very active, and a lot of the movement was followed, or like a lot of the protests were followed, like you could see the impact or like that it had just by following this live broadcast of the square. And I mean, I think this idea, of course, has been like so taken into, and like this has really reproduced this notion of the control room, like the very famous one in Rio, where almost a city or the now can absolutely be documented through a series of mostly visual sensors, but also other data such as traffic or water, and kind of like completing this like holistic view, or like an attempt to a holistic view. And this kind of reminds me a bit of this project that I'll talk about later, the one with Bruno Latour and the oligopolies, with all the views or all the different screens and streams of information that we are receiving at once. I think one thing that is important to notice is that these broadcasts, whether they happen on television or live, they sometimes have this option of interaction. The thing is that depending, of course, on the format, like on YouTube, at times you can, of course, just not have a chat active. But even in YouTube, when the chat is active, like when Beyonce was in 2008 in Coachella, and that the chat was really, really active and the emojis floating and stuff, it never made it part of the broadcast. It was like a separate element. So then when you see or replay the recording, that information of the now is gone. So the spectacle really just remains a spectacle, and as an audience, you cannot be a participant. But this is not really the case in Instagram Live, where with the rapper 6ix9ine, he just released this video that was the most seen till now, with almost 2 million live audience as he came out of prison. And as you can see, I'm having some issue with the playback, but anyways, you can see there is a myriad of interactions, and those interactions are part of the record that is kept in this particular case. I mean, this is just a replay of that. So then this kind of leads me to think more about how do we read the now, and like what are the type of interfaces that we have. I mean, of course, this documentation happens very much through a series of sensors: the audio camera, dosimeters, pollution sensors, water levels, but often the output remains very much confined to that of a screen. Of course, you can have audios like listening to, or like live audio feeds, but in general, or like the teledildonics, where they're kind of like testing the idea of like sexual intimacy through touch and through like of two people separated by live stream of data that kind of communicates these two devices. But still, this documentation remains very flat. And I think it would be, a big challenge, or a question that I want to pose out, ask today is, how do we transcend the screen? How can we obtain a documentation that is much more dimensional and less flat, as Patrick was talking earlier? This is the project that I was referring to earlier of Bruno Latour, Paris Invisible City, where he's exactly looking at these forms of documentation and this scientific approach to understanding the different systems that rule and regulate and govern a city, and reaching a conclusion that basically the city cannot be controlled from one little control room like in Rio de Janeiro, because there are so many aspects, so many elements that come at interplay, many of them that cannot be recorded. But I think it's a very interesting, thorough study that I wanted to, that perhaps many of you already know, but I think it's interesting to reflect. Another idea that I wanted to talk about is this idea also of the timeline of the live feed. So here there is the sirens in Venice for a warning when the water will flood, and these come 2.5 hours before the flooding begins. So often with the live stream, there is this idea of delay from the now of what is happening to the now when you're receiving it. And in this way, it's like a lot of these alarm systems or warning systems kind of play with an idea of the future, of this is what will be happening. And in that regard, I wanted to talk about what is the timeline of a live stream feed. So from the moment I'm speaking now to you, to the moment you receive it, and then what happens afterwards with that data. Particularly, I mean, I think, of course, different platforms have different protocols of how to deal with that data, either storing it or recording it. But what happens to a WhatsApp call after the call is over? What happens to all those bytes? And what kind of processes have been triggered in that journey beyond, of course, the consumption of electricity or the traveling of, or the exchange of information or bytes? This is something that interests me, as well as like the idea of the delay and how the live stream is never live. The same way that when we're looking at the sun, is the sun from 8 minutes ago, and it takes 8 minutes for the light of the sun to reach to us. This image and this audio that you're receiving is also arriving perhaps at something that we perceive to be now and present, but the live quality remains extremely, extremely sensorial. And this is something that I think this lag or this delay, I think is something very interesting to explore also when we are researching and documenting the current moment. Of course, this deals also with time zones, which is extremely apparent also in this workshop. and more so on Wednesday when we want to document our office. But what does an office hour, or like what do office hours mean in Thailand, and what is happening simultaneously in Bangkok, in LA, and how, because of the live stream nature, if you are not there for the spectacle, you miss the spectacle, you're not really present. And I mean, this is something, there is this Google Calendar going on about online that I'm part of, where they put a lot of the lectures that have been happening now in COVID related to architecture, but most of these lectures take place between 1 and 5 a.m. Bangkok time. I'm often modifying my biorhythm to attend these lectures that otherwise I would not be able to attend. So how I want to engage with that information as well. And this is, I just wanted to briefly touch on this, that in the universal time zone system, where it's a movement to kind of abolish the whole idea of time zones and just implement one time zone globally, and then each country, or even down to each individual or each organizational apparatus would develop its own kind of schedule within that. So we go to class from 3 a.m. to 8 a.m. because that's when the sun is out in whatever Bangkok. But then, of course, this would relate a lot more to, I mean, countries maybe closer to the Northern Pole, where the sun hours in the summer are very extended, or versus the winter. I think it can also adapt to a lot of like many different lifestyles, like the doctors working on the ER room, or like 24-hour offices. And what kind of moments would this universal time zone trigger? What would it mean to have this event at 3 a.m.? Because and what would it mean to have like an average hour of sleep, or what would it be to do? And then my last kind of point in this constellation of documentation, I wanted to think about the display. There was this the idea that now, of course, with this live stream, we're all kind of becoming studio managers and kind of like leading into this form of broadcaster live. And in here in particular, there was a project that by Storefront that from a few years ago that I thought was really interesting. And as soon as the lockdown happened, I wanted to exchange with my students, which was basically about the engaging with prominent people from the New York scene in architecture, inviting them to develop a model, say an unboxing video or a tutorial in their home, as a way also to reveal intimate aspects from the background, and also how they decide to establish that rapport with the audience. And this is Keller Easterling in her office at home. There is another video of Diarke, for example, in the living room, or Karen Wong also in her minibar. And I think it's very interesting how we start using the domestic environment as an explanation of who we are or how we want to be presented. This is, of course, very apparent with the notion of the TikTok room and this kind of purplish light that is featuring so heavily in all of these TikTok accounts, where the bedroom, the teenage bedroom, becomes this kind of, as I said, studio or base to broadcast to the world. Same thing is happening, of course, with the green screens, and like a lot of articles have been written, or a lot of portals have appeared on the backgrounds that you can have for your Zoom calls. And of course, whereas now on my Zoom, I'm in space, or Rebecca was at the beach, I was fascinated looking at all the mock office backgrounds that have been developed to disguise the domestic space as a form of impromptu office, but how it's almost like a skeuomorph that we carry on with us. And not only the background, but also the view. Like once I started noticing this, I couldn't unsee it. which was the idea of what I call the TikTok eyes, and is this light ring that appears in the eyes of the people, because that's the device, that's how it's being recorded. And once, as I said, once you see it, you can't really unsee it. And I think this is, for me, extremely interesting, because this device, just this one item, it's transforming the space into that studio. And how is that those TikTok eyes are almost becoming like that way of interacting as well, or documenting our physical presence right now, broadcasting to the rest. Yeah, I think, and now I'm gonna give the word to Tijn, who I think will continue talking about the idea of presentation.
Yes, I will share my screen. That's correct, right?
Great.
So 1 second. I'm very much out of tune with the other three, which is for no other reason than that my MacBook is hopelessly failing me in getting up to stream with the exact format that we were kind of collectively proposing, which is very much in line with what I wanted to add in reference to these very interesting conversations. I wanted to talk about presentation in the way that it addresses a form of reality, and in particular towards the end, a reality in which I wanted to kind of navigate in the direction of reality television. Not that in its exact form becomes something we should implement, but because I think it's an interesting reflection to really use this moment and all of the precarity that surrounds the way we perform in different ways with the world and towards camera, sharing screen, etc. In the way that I think this is introducing interesting forms of opposition. This is a set of images put together that I used for a workshop that I started to work on with some of my students today, in which they will develop, design, and build a broadcast channel, or in other words, reality TV, quote unquote, in service of the school, and in particular in service to the student community. So in one way, it's an interesting way to cast or kind of frame a range of infrastructural and kind of instructive services that will benefit students. At the same time, it became already today an interesting way to sort of criticize, if not even oppose, the ways in which the presentation has become in itself through the softwares that are provided, and ways that everyone at the school is meant to perform something rather problematic, if you will. Authoritarian was a bit of a heavy word raised by one of the students today. But there's awareness amongst at least our student community that a degree of engagement is required that is very different to prior, is something that I wanted to address here. And because the lens is continuing, but maybe in an even more increasing way, kind of framing the way in which we experience the world in various ways. It's interesting to really think about the kind of gestures, the kind of language, and some of the communal and emotional values that are aligned with that. So these are a few fragment screen caps of different forms of exchange or interaction that happens just before or slightly after the lockdown in our city in reference to our school. And at the very back is a screen cap of the virtual parade, as we call it, the virtual show that Patrick and Michal designed. Some of it will be a reference to what Eduardo was already mentioning in an interesting way. So there's this really fundamental overlap in some of the things we want to address. In this case, when talking about the senses, and although what we have already been familiarized ourselves with is something that we really and increasingly need to be critical about. So this idea that the iMac with all of its senses attached suddenly becomes this kind of notion, perhaps, or something to think about when we think about otherness. What do you have in front of you, or who do you have in front of you, and how does that sort of enforce us to appropriate a set of behaviors and conditions that make us feel rather, adapted, if not compromised, I would argue. So this is a diagram that I found, which is a representation, a diagram of a kind of analytical model in the realm of a university that's even barely knowing the exact meaning of all the conditions outlined here, I think is an interesting way to think about cognitive science. Emotionally challenges, the notions of perception and projection. So what is the embodiment of all of that knowledge and the set of conditions that are required when, and challenged when kind of transiting to the often awkward and stiff forms of exchange in a Zoom interaction panel. So it's not a kind of rant against Zoom, but it's very much an attempt to, to sort of try and make us more familiar and criticize, perhaps at certain points, how we use those interfaces. And the ways of emotions that are challenged here, and some of the ways in which collective behavior, and again, some of the normally very normal gestures become perhaps even a tiny bit creepy to some extent when you have 49 participants waving at you. Degrees of physical exhaustion, the comparison to the screen that doesn't maybe become an interaction tool or way of interacting anymore, but rather something rather passive. We don't know anymore what is happening on the other side, even though we see people part of a conversation. So this degree of detachment and also the way it starts to compromise the body, because an increasing amount of activities have been incorporated. They slowly disappear from the realm of Zoom. It's, I think, without question, that the conference call will continue to be a very important kind of aspect in the way that we will position ourselves within the world. So also here, it's a bit of a it's a kind of simplistic attempt to draw a rough comparison. What does it mean to talk about scale and proximity and different scales of inclusion or exclusion when we look with it or without some of the technology that has been enforced upon us? So the ambiguity that I was criticizing a bit before in sharing a screen, having your camera on, becomes increasingly interesting as we are starting to discover, and this is something we are in the process of, also 4 of us, as already presented before, becomes increasingly interesting when we sort of challenge those thresholds and can perhaps reincorporate theories that are rather latent and perhaps relevant.
This is the first of 4 programs in which I want to question some of the assumptions usually made about the tradition of European painting. That tradition which was born about 1400, died about 1900. Tonight, it isn't so much the paintings themselves which I want to consider, as the way we now see them, now in the second half of the 20th century. Because we see these paintings as nobody saw them before. If we discover why this is so, we shall also discover something about
even scholastic definitions on the presentation itself. These are a few experiments that I conducted in some of the courses that I've been teaching. not necessarily related to Zoom presentations or conference calling, but a still relevant study on movement, on gesture, on how the body performs, without a specific form of expertise in movement or choreography, ways in which also the participant to a call can feel inspired. And other experiments shared with some of our students, in which we were experimenting with this idea of layering. So use of green screen techniques that are obviously not new at all can be reintroduced and instrumentalized in the way that alternative narratives can be made. This is a short video of a first-year student who used some of these very simple techniques to develop an alternative dialogue and to use this as a way to think about presentation.
But I think at this moment, it's kind of like a little bit plain, you know? So what do you think? I mean, I like the idea of using star constellation method to create a shape for the smell, because smell is shapeless. Just like a star constellation. I also want to work with scented candlesticks, and that could be the source of the smell on the drawing. Maybe for our model, we could create a box where we're switching the medium of the smell from gas to liquid, and we could melt the candles by using hot water, and it will float on top, and it could be mixed and solidified, and that could be a physical version of our drawing. Are you kidding me? I am astounded. I'm really proud of you. I'm so proud of us. Thank you, you guys.
So I think it's interesting to see an attempt in this case, the form of a workshop of some of the rules and norms of interaction and occupying this very space of presenting itself that can be challenged here. This is an example of another workshop in which, in collaboration with a dance artist / choreographer, we were introducing architectural students to forms of abstraction, not so much into space or drawing, but extreme forms of abstraction in the way that the body performs and occupies the space and occupies an environment with others. And to really develop both performative, but also sort of linguistic and codified definitions on that. So in the first series of exercises, we were working with the body exclusively, in this case with 8 students. And eventually in a second part of the workshop, which you can see here, we started to gradually introduce props, simple everyday objects, in order to sort of enhance the complexity in the kind of structures in behavior and collective movements that we try to explore here. Other attempts to also some of the work of our students, in which we can use the correlation between social and spatial structures, developing again a set of protocols and diagrams that make us understand some of the relationships and the different forms of dimensionality and aspects of scale that can be challenged. Or rather conventional tools like the Google Translate app in your telephone that can suddenly be used as a way to construct other codes. So this way of translating from spoken text, like a voice recorder, down to different languages. And interesting to sort of observe which errors start to occur. It's not a spelling check, but actually interesting to see where glitches start to inspire us into different ways of developing language. And in reference to this drawing by choreographer Lucinda Childs, this interplay between form and geometry and the abstraction of different kinds of codes in space. So further to this interface that Eduardo was already mentioning, the very fact that our desktop becomes perhaps the first degree of occupation in our enhanced digitized existence, also something important to reflect upon how much that is exposing certain elements or dishes that we otherwise not familiar with. Forms of sharing further to some of the types of software tools that kind of challenge the way in which we talk to each other, in this case, through the virtual but online environment of Mozilla Hubs. This is a fragment of the virtual opening of the show Freestyle, developed by Office Space Popular in London, curated by Shumi Bose. There was a slight detail, which was, I think, funny to mention, where Oliver Wainwright lost his own screen in virtual space and he had to be pulled back by Frederick. So all these glitches that you can see here in these kind of unconquered territories become extremely interesting. And on a completely different end, the kinds of interactions that are not through spoken or direct performative layers of interaction, but like in this case, the way that students talk to each other. And the way that also the premise of teaching is very much challenged, I think, in interesting ways through these constraints. Ways in which we can start to explore different software techniques and three-dimensional qualities, such in this case the use of high fidelity in ways that crowds will gather in virtual space. And at current moments, the constraints that apply in hearing them that are close in a more clear manner and those that are far away fading out. This was my initial attempt to, of course, work with some of the online broadcasting tools that Patrick was already mentioning before. A few references in gradually working towards this idea of reality or realness that is, first of all, perhaps grounded within the school itself, a kind of broadcast channel, which from my understanding, I don't think longer exists any longer, but set up by students in order to develop a sort of broadcast channel as an attempt to kind of, build a network of collaboration. And interesting ways really kind of blurring the sort of conventional grounds of the institution and its accessibility, but also the rather polished ways through which schools tend to, or institutes tend to present themselves. I think that was also an important reason for the workshop that I'm now teaching with my students here in Bangkok to be initiated. Another reference of an earlier stage in 1975, where the Open University in England was introducing this idea of broadcasting in a kind of organized effort and through the, if not ironic, construction of these radios as a way to sort of reframe the kind of prominence of education. And as I think is in this lecture that was broadcasted on history and theory. So therefore, that gives a complete different role, I think, at one end to what the presentation is or used to be at that stage, and the way that it starts to sort of stream into the world. So just a brief reference or pickup on what reality TV means, how universal this is. This is a show that is or has been screened in Bangkok for a very long time, where celebrities are disguised by the wearing of outfits and masks, and this kind of constant ambiguity on who is who and how is that recognized through which senses is interesting. The obvious, perhaps, reference also to Big Brother as one of the most and earliest and most iconic reality TV shows kind of casts also this different idea of the world and some of the spatial typologies that are kind of comparative to each other, the hot tub to be found everywhere, and some of the interesting and kind of real or maybe not so real forms of social interaction and proximity that start to be introduced here. Also, this idea of collectivity within the space that is not familiar and perhaps broadcasted through channels that are larger than the extent of your own room or the group in which maybe some of you will also work with, is interesting to then think about also architecturally, where especially this wide sort of poché jacket around the spaces that are actually broadcasted in the Big Brother show are obviously occupied with all of the stuff that is instrumental to generating that visibility. And further to some of the other references on this genre, a reference on these kind of candid camera environments, the camera that is not visible, the scripts to these scenes that are only partly staged, obviously through the man wearing the jackets, and the innocent, ignorant figures that are part of this scene. If not ironically for this particular scene at these very times, I think really interesting to sort of question these dispositions on who is aware, who is trained, who has skills, and is prepared to perform as part of these alternative interactions, and who is not. And how interesting is that? Not necessarily as a form of irony or to make it into a joke, but to sort of continuously challenge which social conventions we want to work with. And the last reference from Poland, generously referred or introduced to me by Michał, in soap operation where an artist, Michał Wolinski, works with found footage from a popular TV series shot at his avant-garde art gallery. So the space he's renting out as a shooting location. So in this case, transformed into a traditional art gallery, this art venue that a Polish society appreciates the most. The paintings that Wolinski is pasting are replaced by those that were already pasted by the maker of the TV series. So both behaviorally, and that's what I think is very interesting in this particular fragment of the scene, this idea of the kind of cliche forms of dialogues and the realness, forms of realness or reality that are forged through the genre of soap opera are really interesting to think about. So also the kinds of, the language that is used, the words that is extremely universal, of course, in magnifying emotions, both verbally and through expression of face and body, I think is very interesting. So I think I will sort of conclude this small contribution here, and will sort of hand over the words to Michał.
Okay, I was turning on all the windows that I have open to make this stream happen. So I will continue on this note, and I will explore the topic of collaboration, and what is the interesting. And I was thinking, what does it mean? And in this the very the moment we are alone, but also together at the same time. So what is actually the collaboration, and is it sort of the exchange, a support, a mutual the agreement, or gift? And thinking about this, and also from my the personal the interest, I was thinking about. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. Okay. So I was thinking about the game that you can find in this in the very the center and bottom right the corner, which is called Death Stranding, and it's very the interesting. I have a message from Tijn that you cannot hear me.
No, it's my mistake. Sorry.
Okay. Yes. Okay. So, so it's very interesting, because in this game we are getting and we are playing as this courier. The internet is shut down, and then we are walking through all of this the landscape, and carrying sort of like the stuff to deliver from like the one place or to do some like the tasks. And once like we are like walking through all of these like the landscapes, there are like sometimes like the necessities as like the crossing the river. Therefore, we are like the building a bridge that can become like that is becoming like the useful for only us. And this game is as a multiplayer game, and it's like the very like interesting because it's like the exactly like the portraying the situation that we are at this moment. So we are like the playing as a single player. We never meet. We never meet the other players. However, we are facing, or we can find the artifacts that someone else like they built and use it as a sort of like our like the and they use it. And I find this like the very like the super like the interesting because this is sort of like the recreation, the sort of like the economy or like the gift like the economy. So this is where we are not expecting anything in the return. However, something as a resource is being left in this like the digitalized in this digital like the world. So of course, and as you can see in the like this like the bottom part, like the Hideo Kojima, he's saying that the likes in depth like the strengthening are unconditional like the love, not like the currency. And this it's also like the very like the nice how to look into the idea of like the building of like the curating and gathering and the streaming. And to stay with online and with a game like the environment, I will play it like the one more time over here. But this is the project from Reporters Without like the Borders, and this is the Minecraft library, and it's like also like it's very interesting to think about the laws and the regulations, and actually this like the vertical sort of like the stack that sometimes maybe doesn't even intersect, and there are loopholes in this like the network where, for example, in the countries that the censorship is heavy and the articles are like being like blocked, in Minecraft the players can access the content that is blocked by the government. And I think this is also the very like the interesting, and the using this sort of this new like the tools to find like the ways of really like the continuously like the building, like the processing, like the knowledge and sharing and allowing others to access. And so to continue and maybe going into this kind of like the cross like the text, this is a snippet from Wrong Biennale, and like the part of the like the Wrong Biennale that is like the very like the digital and international like the Biennale that is like the happening online. The organizers, they released a wrong router. And this is right now, this is like the cross because of the also like of the updated situation of the pandemic, but I will read. So now you can walk into MoMA with your device. So with this like the router, and host your digital art show in the same room as Roy Lichtenstein, Jackson Pollock, or Salvador Dali, or while snacking in Central Park, or while dancing in your favorite club's bathroom, or while commuting, or while even in a heavy traffic. And yes, your show joins yeah, okay. So but it's super like the interesting how we combining like the multiple like the ideas of like the mobility and this new like the devices, we can really like the start like the reconstructing and constructing these like the spaces. Here is like the updated, but also like the very true that while in like the lockdown due to the pandemic, you can broadcast art or probably any files to your like the closest like the neighbors. And this is something also like the how actually we are like the protecting the networks that we are creating, that we are like the use for this like the password. But here is like actually it's like the reverse. It's being this sort of like the kind of like the exhibitionist, but also like the having also like not nothing in return. It's really like the kind of like the sending or like the leaving the book somewhere in the bus or sending it through mail. And to talk about this, I will just maybe move into the platforms and different platforms that also like right now are like the growing and collectives. And this is interesting how to anonymize your online like the footprint, whether protesting in person or working in digital like the spaces or both. And this is also like the very relevant how there is like the necessity to study the tools that we are using, the licenses, the laws and the regulation, the terms and the agreements, and to understand how actually we are like the exposed, and what sort of like the tools we should use, what sort of like the constellations to build. Right now, for example, we are using Zoom, but there are like the various also other like the platforms as like the Jitsi, for example, to start also like the broadcasting that are like claiming, I didn't read, but that there are like the claiming that are like the fully like the open source. So maybe there are also the ways to really like the build very like the complex set of tools and like the really like the combining and shifting to maybe add a little bit or like be exposed a little bit or get this like the attention, which what Patrick was also mentioning with the brave and the proof of reputation. And with the idea of like the reputation, there is also like the relevant community, and this community is like is the only social network built on like the trust. And in that social network, there is idea of voting for the content that is like the relevant and that is like the helping to expand the knowledge of the community. And therefore, through like the voting, there is like the proof of like the reputation. So those who are really like the active, those who are getting like a lot of votes from like the community, they are becoming this new sort of like the relevant, for the lack of a better word, like the person. But what is like the interesting is these types of new networks are bringing the new kind of like the wave, let's say the updated like the celebrities that right now in the times of like the pandemic, we like the starting realizing that all of this very disturbing messages and the influence that some of like the celebrities at this point they have. So right now, maybe like this like the very like the interesting like the platforms that are going and really like they're looking into other ways of like the interactions. Like maybe they will grow, but I imagine like let's say not like the focusing on the person. And so this that brings also like the idea of the Facebook or Instagram versus like the Discord, and the centralized large like the servers versus the servers that are like the very like the local. And I think like the becoming this like the server through the platforms, through the live stream, through this like the small like the pockets, actually not exposing ourselves into the like the large crowds, or not like the following the likes that are on the Instagram that are really like the trying to push us into the culture of like the production and translation it into the like the monetization of everything that is really like the happening. It's interesting, let's say, with the collaboration, with the combination of the Patreon, that there is a distrust in the like the community, therefore the support, and therefore we can start like the building like the very interesting like the resources. And just to kind of like the conclude, I feel like the yes, so like the broadcast is through the hardware, software, like the screens, like the bandwidth, and this like the yes, and display. This is also sort of like the already post-produced like the reality. So it would be like the very like the interesting to really like the study what actually does it mean and how to like the critically like the evaluate these tools as we see like the through the other like the platforms and like the TikTok and moving into the like the Instagram, moving into the stories. This like the live feed is becoming like the very very important. And there is something from the new models kind of that I want to like just say like just kind of to sum up. So like this, your online space is as good as your IRL space. So if your IRL space is problematic, your online space is going to suck. So I think it's very like the important to find this sort of like the balance with the community, with the IRL, and how actually we can start like the taking care of it, but also like the expanding and testing and evaluating the tools and collaborating and yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good place to kind of form some conclusion and maybe also begin to kind of, if there's time for it, have a little bit of a conversation to kind of try to get on a similar page. I mean, we understand an intention based on initial conversations from Space Saloon about what you're going to be doing this summer and how you're going to be participating. And I think in by no means do we intend to kind of like fetishize certain tools or virtual digital environments. But I think also from what we heard, especially from Danny, I think the point of your workshop is to get away from the screen and to like look towards the local, look towards the community. And I think relative to what Mihail was just saying, I think these things are like highly intertwined. And the reason we propose a kind of way to build this kind of like, to embrace the live, to build this metaverse of resources for collaboration is to try to kind of like entangle those together very knowledgeably, very willingly and intentfully in order to, again, surpass the kind of commoditized product that's being handed to us. So I'm curious, and maybe this is something that can even then go to Danny, is like, how do you guys plan to work on projects, right? And I think what we're trying to propose is when it comes to communicating and collaborating, to try to engage some of these tools. Also relative to how you are spending more and more time in your bedroom, in your office, in your studio space, what will this become? Like given like maybe that you have at least one more month of like somewhat stringent distancing measures in place, or up to 6 months. What can you make this place in terms of a studio? How will you kind of connect outward as well as then kind of refining the IRL, like as Mihail was saying. So whether individually or group projects, we think it's interesting to kind of propose some element of the live in your kind of sharing of what you're doing, some sort of entanglement of cameras that don't just have to be your webcam. I think it's quite interesting to turn this off and to start engaging or showing other things to kind of dislodge what you think has to be shown, or I show nothing, or you can start to choose what you show. I think in a really interesting way.
That's one that I just thought about when you were, Patrick, saying next to our space there is like the gallery, and there like a lot of artists are occupying like the floors, and there is like the super like the interesting, and I love this like the project, which is the artists they are like the purchasing the space for the advertisement in the Chinese like the newspaper that is like the very like the local, and then is being like distributed in the neighborhood by placing different types of like the artifacts, like the media, instead of the ads. And this is kind of like you don't have the reception on actually what is like maybe like the going like the back, but actually it's interesting kind of this analog way of just sending it and not knowing even what is like the happening yeah, like the what is the reception of some like the piece. And I think find this like the very very interesting.
Guys, thank you so much. I think it was I took so many notes during your interventions, and I mean, this is like, I feel it's like really opening up like a huge spectrum of issues as well as potentials. So it's not only questioning and sort of being aware of the limitations and also the kind of hidden agendas behind our communications tools, but it's also about trying to hack in those and learning how to master them in order to regain agency over the way we transmit our information. And I think what you were saying in the conclusion, I think is very relevant, because that's how we are building community nowadays. So
right.
I think the better we can communicate, and the stronger the community. I wonder, I think it would be very useful for everyone in the room if you guys could just direct us very, kind of simply and very directly to some of the tools that you mentioned. And maybe like, if you were to start somewhere, where would you start? I think what we've seen with the OBS looks very interesting. This idea of kind of being the director of your own screen. That's something that is quite fascinating. So I would say, like, before we then talk again on Wednesday, I think it would be great for everyone to start to play around with some of these tools. And yeah, I'm asking you, what's your opinion? Where should we start from?
Michał, you were using OBS today, right? Or you're using XSplit?
Yes, I'm using XSplit.
So, I mean, already we have been testing different ones, and the two that we have found that are free and relatively user friendly are OBS and XSplit. And we understand these to be like just widely used within the kind of online gamers and streaming community, and YouTubers as well. And so this is also why in this initial conversation, we didn't want to be too committed to any one, because we're also curious. There may be some of you who are already familiar with these. I mean, I think anyone who is probably familiar with Discord and Twitch knows about OBS a little bit to a certain extent, and may be far more familiar with it than we are, because I think some of us have just started to familiarize ourselves with it in the last 6 months. But we think those are very good starting places. And in terms of our initial research, we understand that OBS can work with Google Hangouts, can work with Zoom, should be able to work with Jitsi. Jitsi is, again, the kind of open source conference call application that Michał was mentioning. So we think OBS is a great starting point. XSplit is just as simple, and we put the links in the chat here, but we can also copy them over to the Discord. But we see a kind of, I guess, a little bit of an ecosystem with whoever's using OBS, Discord, and Twitch as a kind of like a triangle of platforms that seem to kind of like stitch really well together in terms of bringing in a chat, sending links to a community. I don't know if you have anything to add to that. Yeah.
Maybe I would like to ask in the room, like if there's anyone who's familiar with these platforms to speak up, because I think it would be good to get a feeling of where we stand with this.
Anyone? OBS? No.
A quick side note, I'm a Mac user, and as you've seen, I'm the only one not paving the way into this call with the use of OBS. I would definitely not discourage anyone using OS X to sort of get along some of the paths that we are using, but it might be good, as I'm also familiarizing myself with the different ways of connecting through OBS, different forms or platforms of streaming, to see what fits. So it's something me as part of the other three, I will also continue to explore. But this is more on the detail. So for example, it's for Mac use is a bit more challenging, as it seems, to link your OBS interface or to develop a virtual video connection to Zoom, for example. But there are other ways to reroute this through Twitch, for example, and stream it perhaps through other mediums.
Well, and one other thing to note too is that, I mean, that we were really interested in encouraging, like I have multiple cameras set up in my room right now. I have one looking at my books. I have one looking at my computer. I'm using my webcam. These are like old iPhones, like an iPhone 6 and an iPad mini that I don't use anymore, but I was able to resurrect for the purpose of this external camera, which I think is really nice. So I think too, we're trying to kind of promote a way to kind of like, in a very scrappy way, kind of collages together, like don't invest in things, like let's see what you can make or how you can broadcast yourself with what you have. And I think, like, again, this kind of open source, very cheap, as quick as possible. This is maybe the kind of dirty approach that we'd like to promote.
So am I understanding, I mean, I'm picturing this in that the next time we see you, which is on Wednesday sometime, you're expecting us all to sort of have something different in this space.
Yes, I would say try to break your comfort zone with when it comes to having some authorship over what you share in terms of screen. So those of you who are choosing not to share any video, like I would love to see you take one step forward, which is like showing us part of your environment, making a diorama, putting the camera there. It doesn't have to be you, and it doesn't have to be you opening tabs or anything here, but I think some step forward for everyone and having some authorship over the kind of visual or audio that is shared, that would be a great first step. I mean, for some extremely new users, like maybe virtual background is step one for Wednesday, right? Just to like lower like the pressure of expectations. Like if you haven't done that, try that. If you've done that already, like take another step forward to see what you can kind of put together. But the idea is on Wednesday, we do a kind of walkthrough specific to OBS. And hopefully that point, we've broken a little bit out of the confines of Zoom. So maybe we can test another platform, or we try to get in Zoom. Let's see how open and flexible this is. But yeah, I would say one kind of exploratory and experimental step forward when it comes to what you show us or what you share. That would be really nice.
Yeah, first of all, thank you guys. This was a really great introduction to not only kind of the Satellite Lab, but also the diversity of all of your work and the ways you approach these new questions that we're dealing with. And so it's great to kind of kick off the whole summer with these kind of questions, right? And I think it's important for everyone to realize that, you know, this moment right now is called researching, meaning it's an exploration. It's not meant to be a synthesis of anything that you're doing or thinking about to then present and share with people. It's a moment of opening up that exploration to, as everyone's been saying here, kind of a live stream, let's say behind the scenes picture into your own thoughts and your own inquiries. So I just want to encourage everyone not to kind of think that whatever is being broadcast is meant to be of some sort of finished quality. You know, we're here to open up and kind of share our working process, because I think my one critique about about Zoom, about Google Meet, about any of these kind of presentations is that there's always a kind of formalism to the things that are being shown. And I think our goal here is to kind of break that pressure. I don't know if you guys agree with that, but you know, just in the screen that Patrick has up right now, you know, the goal is to actively pursue documentation. So we're here to experiment with the tools like OBS and XSplit and Discord and Twitch and everything, and critique those. So our goal also is, as we're kind of openly exploring these on our own and together, is to take notes of what works and what doesn't work, so we can share those thoughts. And yeah, I think as a starting point, you know, we're not here to tell anyone what to look at or what to investigate. We're here to give the tools and kind of openly share and kind of, let's say, figure out those tools together. What subjects you are investigating are entirely up to you to you know, investigate on your own. And I think it just does start with kind of an investigation into your own neighborhood, your own territory, your own environment. You know, if it's pointing the camera out your window and trying to see how to connect that to OBS, it's a great first step, you know. So I think it's in these next few days, it's really about that kind of exploration of the software as a moment to, you know, go against this flatness that everyone's talking about. Yes, the screen is flat, but instead of a linearity of showing one image after another, it's about this ability to kind of be messy and be chaotic. You know, who said it? You know, keeping up with the chaos of the internet. I think it's also about there's a certain aesthetic to that chaos which we can embrace, which is also the aesthetic of research, which is messy, which is like in a way in a process of organization.
And I guess if I may quickly add also how you sit in that, in maybe a kind of literal way, but also, yeah, kind of along different layers of existence within that world or environment, from your chair to other, instances.
I think also I wanted to add, I mean, I understand the kind of maybe the direction that Space Saloon might be driving the kind of participants in the workshop is to get them to reflect on their community. In a certain way, I imagine you've spent a lot of time where you are right now. So certain things are growing mundane, right? I think this idea then of broadcasting your space for a new set of eyes is then helpful then for letting others contribute to what you see or what like is there. Because I think we're from a very diverse set of places. So like Bangkok may be very like exotic for some of you, but not for others, right? So it's interesting to think about what you show also could then kind of be analyzed with fresh eyes. You can start a conversation. You can start to also get to know each other in this way, in terms of like, if you guys are working together, face-to-face on webcams doesn't leave much to a conversation. But if I'm showing you books that I'm reading or music I'm listening to or a plant that I'm trying not to let die, right? Like this can start to soften up and let us relate to each other and build projects together in an interesting way, hopefully.
I think just to talk a little bit about the structure. We have the Discord channel open. I've noticed a lot of people have been signing in, which is great. And already I see Rebecca sharing some of the links to OBS and XSplit, and there's a lot of comments in this Zoom chat, which I think we should kind of bring over to the Discord, so there's a record of it. Because the moment we close Zoom, that chat is kind of gone. So, you know, Mihao, like some of your tips I think that you're having about how to technically get these things to work, let's move that over into the workshops conversation. And really, you know, there is no, let's say, kind of set of instructions that we're giving right now, because it's the first workshop. We're kind of easing into the tools, and we just want to have everyone on their own time kind of take that moment to explore the tools themselves. I think if we were to talk about a certain goal, it is coming together on Friday or next week to start talking to each other. You know, we really didn't have much of an introduction, and that's the one thing that we wish we had more of, is to really meet everyone. And I think this would be a great opportunity if everyone kind of conceives in their mind of putting together some presentation of themselves, their environment, their community, or their research topics that they're interested in, into this kind of format of multiple kind of media, screen share, live stream. And I think that's a good way to kind of define what kind of goal we're all collectively working together on.
Yes, I mean, I think to move the kind of technical questions conversation to Discord would be great. We're happy to kind of keep that a running conversation and talk as much about that side of things as possible. But yeah, super excited. It was really great to meet everyone. We're happy to be involved. We're looking forward to seeing what you do. And I mean, also we're looking forward to like learning more about this. Where we started basically scratching the surface in terms of like a kind of educational component using these tools in March, and we've kind of been slowly learning, and we hope to kind of learn more alongside you guys so we can prepare for, I mean, the other side is our summer classes started today, and we're preparing for a fall semester, which foreseeably is online. So this is like extremely helpful for us as well in terms of seeing what you do with it, seeing how we can grow alongside.
And Patrick, can I just ask a question about the kind of, let's say, schedule for Wednesday, or what the plan for Wednesday is?
The idea is that we were going to like stream live our workday, which is 10 to 6 at the studio, and then try to have maybe 2 moments where we're like directly available in video conference for like 1 hour each. And in terms of where those fall within the 10 to 6 Bangkok time schedule, I think we're a bit flexible. It's kind of when there's maybe a critical mass that wants to have a video conference and talk about their issues, but we can also kind of through the course of that day just be active on Discord, answering questions as they come, sharing little demos. So maybe we can kind of maybe fix down those 2 hour slots more concretely as you guys see fit, but anywhere within that 10 to 6 block is great for us.
Yeah, so I think we're gonna maybe run like a quick survey to see when people maybe will be more available, and then let you guys know.
I do just want to say real quick that we did talk about the issue of Bangkok time with most of our participants, and kind of a normal work day for Bangkok, as you guys already pointed out, is I think Eduardo said he has to change his cycles to kind of meet up with the rest of the world. So 10 to 6 Bangkok time is when most of us are probably fast asleep.
Yeah.
Because right now it's almost 11 midnight where you guys are, or even 1 a.m. What time is it?
It's 11 p.m.
So you're the ones that had to make kind of the sacrifice in terms of time for everyone else to make it, right? And I think it's strategizing how this is going to work out might be a little difficult to find an hour that we can all come together. I'd really encourage just let's say a lot of discussion on the Discord, because we are all at different times right now, right? And then just to reiterate that everything that we're doing is going to be recorded and shared, and it might be a lot to share a 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. A video. So I think, again, trying to find those specific hours. We talked before, and everyone chime in here if they have thoughts on this, but we talked before about the timing, and I think about the end of your evening, 4 to 6, would work mostly for those in Europe and South Africa for their early mornings. But I think we kind of missed most of the US. Anyways, we'll sort it out in the chat and we'll figure it out. But I think just to say, like, a lot of this discussion should be kind of between now and Wednesday in the Discord chats.
sounds good. I mean, we'll try to keep it informal too. You like maybe a few of us can stay later on Wednesday. We'll try to make it work.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we're rounding about 2 hours now, so I think that's kind of the limit for everyone on these things. And we'll end it here. Just again to say thank you to the amazing Monitor Lizard. Thank you for putting all this together. It was really great to see kind of all these questions and thoughts, and also just a little bit of celebration of all the work that you guys have already been doing in asking these questions and trying to answer them. I don't know if Rebecca or John wants to say anything else, or if there's any kind of questions or comments from the crowd before we wrap up.
I see there's a lot of action in the chat already about technical issues, which is great. I mean, I think this is really, it's about like in these 2 days just going crazy with all the inspiration that the guys from Bangkok gave us, and then on Wednesday we will have a chance to figure out how to work around it, I guess.
Maybe my only note is that you can also use OBS to hack Instagram Live. I'll find out there's like another free open source program that you have to download. But yeah, it can be applied to other platforms as well.
Yeah, I think Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, Instagram, you should be able to use OBS to stream to all of those, I think. And then, as you said, and that's probably just going to increase the savvier you get and the more plugins you acquire. So. Great, guys. Thanks so much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Good night.
Thank you.
The recording might take like 15 minutes to process. We'll send it to you ASAP.
Thank you very much.
Yes, we'll share it as soon as we can.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye-bye.